Welcome to Talent Buzz, where I talk with SaaS companies on how they are doing their talent acquisition. Last week, I noticed a LinkedIn post from a person called Matthijs Welle. He's the founder of Mews, and he wrote down that in the last 1 month, 51 recruitment agencies had reached out to him, and that is a big number. And he also shared that if he could go back in time, he would bring in recruitment to their in-house team faster. They used to use a lot of agencies, and that was a mistake he did. So I asked him to join my podcast to talk about his learnings on bringing talent acquisition in-house. They just raised a C round of funding of $185 million. So a lot of interesting learnings here. But let's start the most interesting one. Why Matt thinks that companies should own their in-house talent acquisition teams rather than outsource it to an agency.
Just I see now the impact an in-house recruitment team has had on our business, and I could just see that they much quicker are able to gauge whether a candidate is our culture and whether the companies that they've worked for is the right work experience versus with an external company. Every time you work with an external agency, you need to educate them. You need to go through the sourcing process saying, yeah, that's not a company we get excited about. This one is. And it takes so much education to get them going. And often they don't work out for us. And then we have to move to the next one and go through that whole cycle of educating them again. And you have specific agencies for specific niches. Like for sales, we had a different agent than we use for development. And, a bunch of times it just didn't work out for us. So, but I have to say, I can't imagine a world where we would never use agencies, right? Because on the one side, you scale up really rapidly. And as you slow down the scale up, you don't want to have some heavy recruitment team sitting there idle. So you need to always have a healthy balance. I think in my LinkedIn post, there was a lot of response from agencies who were like, this make no sense. But in that moment, it made sense to me when I posted it. But I'm not as extreme in my thinking as saying everything would always have to be in-house.
Exactly. And I actually just told my co-founder that we are doing this episode that, hey, we're having this discussion, like, should you have an agency or not? And kind of personally, I believe that we agree basically on all the things there. That even though I'm a talent acquisition owner, I still believe that kind of recruitment is something that companies should own in-house. It's so kind of strategically important for companies. So that's interesting. But what you mentioned there regarding onboarding, I think one maybe kind of mistake that companies do when working with agencies, like when a recruiter starts working with your in-house team, you bring someone in, really, you onboard them properly. You go through your product, you go through your people, you go through your customers, what's our culture. But typically when companies start to work with the recruitment agency, they skip all that. And recruitment agencies don't demand that one from the customers. And I can really imagine kind of if you just go like, hey, now we need a salesperson, and then an agency starts to look for that person without having an understanding of your product or culture, it will be a challenge for sure.
Yeah. And the challenge we have, because we're a vertical SaaS business. So on the one side, we'd love people with hospitality experience because we're a hospitality software. And on the other side, well, is it not better to get a SaaS experienced person? And it's a very fine line between those two types. And it's very rare that you get both of those types in one person. And I think an in-house recruiter can much faster understand whether they have the right skill set from hospitality and tech than an external one who just wants to know, which one do you want me to look for? Like hospitality or SaaS? And that is not always the right mindset.
Exactly. You mentioned there that kind of understanding the culture, understanding the business goals is crucial. But one thing you mentioned kind of additional to those in your LinkedIn post was kind of regarding motivation and kind of how people are getting paid. So typically, if we look at an in-house recruiter, they typically have a kind of monthly salary. Either it's kind of completely fixed or there's a kind of good base salary and then maybe some bonuses based on kind of how they do their work. But typically when companies actually do work with recruitment agencies, there is a success fee. And kind of question regarding that one, like when you be working with recruitment agencies, have you typically worked with kind of success fee, like you pay only when they kind of deliver those people to your organization, or how that has been working for you?
Yeah, so you normally split it, right? So you get the upfront for the sourcing bits where they give you the candidate types, and then as they start to land candidates, you'll get a second payment and then possibly one once you actually close the right person. Our in-house, they don't have any incentive plan. We just need to make sure that we pay them at the, at the top of the band so that they
Yeah.
feel like they were really getting the right reward. But I don't want them incentivized with closing as fast as possible. I want them to be incentivized with turnover of staff. Effectively, is the number we should be looking at. Involuntary attrition and voluntary attrition are both important metrics that we need to look at that tell the success of our recruitment team. And we've not really paid anyone incentive that is in-house because it drives. It's funny because the other day, one of our in-house recruiters came to me and she said, I feel like for this particular role, it doesn't pay off to have an external recruiter because he's pushing some of these candidates because he wants to close the deal. And she's like, give it to me. I can do a better job of this recruitment piece because I'm not motivated by closing it. I'm motivated by getting the right person in the company because I have shares in this company and the value of my shares will increase over time significantly more if we get a leader in at that level.
Yeah. Interesting. But would you work with a recruitment agency that doesn't work with success fee? Like, would you be willing to pay a recruitment agency kind of in a similar way that you pay your in-house recruiter? So there's fixed fee and you pay the same whether they found the person or not, actually.
I guess it could work. Like you start normally with an incentive until you get to know the agency and the core essence of the people that you work with at the agency. The incentive is to really motivate them to get some results. And as you see their work ethic, I think you could shift towards it. But I think it would be very hard for me to find a new agent and then immediately stop paying incentives and fees based and having them on a retainer. Like, I think I first want to really understand their personal work ethics that they have.
Yeah, interesting. Because that was something that kind of I noticed. I have background from marketing agencies, leading sales teams over there. And when we were selling marketing services, basically our kind of monthly retainers were based on the work we did for the customer. So basically, whether we produce content to social media, to their blog, did paid advertising, did website, all that. But it was always tied to the work itself, not regarding like where they're getting leads or where they're getting revenue, but the actual work. And then kind of when I moved from marketing to kind of talent acquisition, it was actually quite surprising for me that actually a lot of companies are paying based on the kind of success. And I think there isn't that many other industry where that's the kind of case. For example, let's talk quickly about your kind of SaaS tool pricing. Is your pricing based on the kind of usage of your tool or the kind of results that your tool is bringing for your customers?
I wish it was the lab. Like, I wish that we would be like, we started with a usage-based model where we said, if you're a hotel, you have 50 rooms and you've got 20 rooms occupied, we'll charge you for the 20 rooms occupied. And based on your performance, this is a variable cost. And hoteliers were like, we don't understand it. Can you just tell me how much I'm supposed to pay? And now we've shifted to a very static model. But I'd much rather have something that shows that we're having an impact on this hotel's performance. But our industry just isn't ready for it. Like, we pay for most of our SaaS services based on that, right? So our Microsoft servers, the more of the server space we use, the more we pay for it, which makes complete sense. Unfortunately, our hospitality space is not even convinced to move into the cloud, let alone pay for usage. But it's definitely a journey that we'd love to be on because it makes more sense.
Yeah, interesting. Because kind of what we have noticed with working with our customers, typically customers are actually more happy when they are on a monthly retainer compared when they are on a success fee. Because exactly what you mentioned there, kind of if our kind of income is only based for the moment when you kind of find that first and right person for the company, then it basically kind of automatically makes us push that person to you, even though it wouldn't be a cultural fit or kind of skill set wouldn't be right there. So I think there are kind of a lot of challenges with that model. But going kind of back down in a kind of memory lane, like when did you hire your first kind of in-house recruiter for your team?
Quite early, actually. Like, we're 10 years old today, and I think about 6 years ago we had a first in-house recruiter. But it was more, we brought him in. We didn't know what we were looking for because we were clueless about recruitment at that time. Right? We had recruitment was me going on LinkedIn and stalking some developers. Like, I felt like this this man tried to target people on LinkedIn and like never really succeeding. And they were like, we should probably have someone who does the interviewing. And that was what the first recruiter was, someone who did the interviews. But actually, over time, we've really upped the game and got some killer recruitments in who've come out of agencies who have really built the skill, but who got frustrated by working at agencies and who were looking for a longer term base that they could build around a real company. And when you get those people that really deeply understand recruitment and how do you talk about a company, how do you pitch it fast and get results, that really drove very different results from our very, very early recruitment efforts that we did.
Yeah. And kind of as we talked, like I think we both believe that kind of recruitment should be in-house, kind of in a long term, and basically the ownership of that one should be in-house. But maybe kind of let's talk a bit about kind of specific moments when it makes sense to maybe outsource part of the recruitment, and maybe starting from kind of your latest news. So $185 million C-round funding. So a lot of funding coming in, most likely scaling the team. Like, is this a moment, for example, in your case, when you are kind of using some additional help in the kind of recruitment?
So actually, we preloaded the scaling to this year already. We took there's some risk there, I guess, right? So we were raising Series C, but we're like, we want to make sure that we don't raise it and then for like a year have to start looking for people, and that slows us down. So this year we hired about 300 people in the company. We went from 350 to 650 people. And next year we're only adding 200 people. So we are actually slowing down despite the hiring, because most of the hires have landed at the end of this year, which was a risk. Like we pre-noted the hiring knowing that the Series C was going to come in. But it gives us a real acceleration that we see now. So the team that we have in place, we've got about 15 recruiters and sourcers currently in the team. And they have to hire a lower load of new people coming in, but we have really shifted the strategy towards sourcing and making sure that we have pipelines, because we do find sometimes in our business that, there's this challenge in businesses where if someone is not performing, managers are hesitant to take action because they're like, well, it's going to take you 6 months to find a replacement. So in those 6 months, I'm going to be suffering as a manager. And we actually want to take that risk away by having proactive sourcers saying, actually, we've got 3 people lined up. So if a person is not performing, I can do a very quick switch across. And hopefully it makes us have a much healthier team in the organization. So that'll be the shift this year. Well, recruitment in general slows down. We shouldn't slow down hiring because we need to start, replacing and making sure we have the absolute best talent on the market.
Exactly. I think that was super interesting to hear, and actually something that we have been lately talking a lot is kind of this approach of really kind of building talent pipelines. So kind of making sure that you have those people in line already before you need to hire, because otherwise you just find yourself in a kind of those challenges. But for example, kind of during this year, like, have you used any outside help in your recruitments? And if yes, like, why? What has been those situations?
So several, because the base team was really good, but because you shift sometimes, right? So this year was very heavy on the R&D hiring. So we hired about, I think, 250 people or 200 people in R&D. Next year, we're shifting very much to go-to-market because we've built that R&D team out, but now we've underinvested in go-to-market. So not all recruiters, you can just freely shift between segments. So especially if you have specific projects that you're looking for, you want to get a recruiter. And if it's C-level, you don't always have the senior recruiter that could carry a C-level hire. So that's where we use an external agency for. So we do have a number of partners that we generally work with and have relationships with, but we want to make sure that our team gets the workload first. And whenever there's a gap, we will fill it with an agency.
Exactly. And you mentioned there kind of that you are kind of heavily investing in sourcing and recruiting, but you didn't mention kind of employer branding. Like, what's your take on that one? Do you have someone in-house working on employer branding? And like, do you see kind of value of building a brand towards kind of potential employees?
Yeah, so I remember a few years ago, I think it's about 6 years ago, that I was like, crap, we don't have a HR department. Maybe we should. And then I joined this HR community, and there every month I meet with these HR directors in Prague, and I was learning. And at some point, there was a topic about employer branding, and I was like, "That's a thing? Okay, let me figure this out." And we have now a full-time director of employer branding in house, and it's because it's a real job. Like, you're the website represents our customers and what they're looking for. But what about the culture and which platform do you use for culture? So, initially on Instagram, for example, we were always posting about our product, but no one on Instagram is looking to buy a B2B software. It's very unsexy. But the culture aspect is really critical. So our Instagram strategy is really around representing the culture of Mews, whereas our LinkedIn strategy is very much around content for our customers. So you really need to think about, where do I want to hire? So we've shifted very much towards a hybrid environment. We employ people wherever the talent is, we will employ them. But our employer branding focuses on specific hubs. So Czech Republic and Spain are markets where labor is more affordable. It's quite employer friendly in that sense. And there's great language representation. So we said those Spain and Czech Republic are our hubs where employer branding, where we write blog posts in the local language, where we do local events, we go to local universities. So it really drives the inflow of more talent at the top of the pipeline. We might not end up hiring it, but those are the markets that we prefer to hire talents from. Whilst if we find better talent in a different place, we'll hire it wherever the talent comes in from.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you got a lot of good ideas about SaaS talent acquisition. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share it on your socials so others can hear it too. And if you have a topic in mind that you would like me to cover in this podcast, share it with me as well. I'm Samuli, CEO and co-founder in TalentBee, where we help fast-growing SaaS companies in their talent acquisition. Make sure to follow us, make sure to follow this podcast, and have an awesome week. Bye-bye.